The rancher discovered his twins asleep in the arms of the poor widow, who had been hired solely to clean the barn. Territory of Wyoming, late autumn 1887. The Thorn Ranch barn's slats were cracked, and the wind hummed softly through the calm, deep night. Jack Thorn. Taking a lantern, they entered with the expectation that they would only hear the steady sound of horses and the typical cracking of wood. But he was stunned by what he witnessed. Clara, the gentle widow he had employed to muck stables, was sitting there, tucked away in a bed of hay. Her back was at ease. Her arms encircled two tiny sleeping figures in a protective manner against a post. His twins, Elsie and EMTT, were huddled up against her, their small fists clenched in the creases of her shabby gown. His What a Viller was being sung by her. It was a shaky lullaby, steeped in consolation and pain, and hardly audible. Her lips moved reverently, her eyes were closed, and her face was pale in the lamplight. Jack remained silent. He remained still. A single, painful break came from something long frozen and forgotten inside his chest. Clara got out of the stagecoach 2 weeks ago into a blustery wind, her boots churning up dry dust. Her arms encircled two tiny sleeping figures in a protective manner against a post. His twins, Elsie and EMTT, were huddled up against her, their small fists clenched in the creases of her shabby gown. His What a Viller was being sung by her. It was a shaky lullaby, steeped in consolation and pain, and hardly audible. Her lips moved reverently, her eyes were closed, and her face was pale in the lamplight. Jack remained silent. He remained still. A single, painful break came from something long frozen and forgotten inside his chest. Clara got out of the stagecoach 2 weeks ago into a blustery wind, her boots churning up dry dust. Her arms encircled two tiny sleeping figures in a protective manner against a post. His twins, Elsie and EMTT, were huddled up against her, their small fists clenched in the creases of her shabby gown. His What a Viller was being sung by her. It was a shaky lullaby, steeped in consolation and pain, and hardly audible. Her lips moved reverently, her eyes were closed, and her face was pale in the lamplight. Jack remained silent. He remained still. A single, painful break came from something long frozen and forgotten inside his chest. Clara got out of the stagecoach 2 weeks ago into a blustery wind, her boots churning up dry dust. Her arms encircled two tiny sleeping figures in a protective manner against a post. His twins, Elsie and EMTT, were huddled up against her, their small fists clenched in the creases of her shabby gown. His What a Viller was being sung by her. It was a shaky lullaby, steeped in consolation and pain, and hardly audible. Her lips moved reverently, her eyes were closed, and her face was pale in the lamplight. Jack remained silent. He remained still. A single, painful break came from something long frozen and forgotten inside his chest. Clara got out of the stagecoach 2 weeks ago into a blustery wind, her boots churning up dry dust. Her arms encircled two tiny sleeping figures in a protective manner against a post. His twins, Elsie and EMTT, were huddled up against her, their small fists clenched in the creases of her shabby gown. His What a Viller was being sung by her. It was a shaky lullaby, steeped in consolation and pain, and hardly audible. Her lips moved reverently, her eyes were closed, and her face was pale in the lamplight. Jack remained silent. He remained still. A single, painful break came from something long frozen and forgotten inside his chest. Clara got out of the stagecoach 2 weeks ago into a blustery wind, her boots churning up dry dust. She only had one canvas bag with her. Her face was hollowed out from too many sleepless nights. Her robe was worn, and her hands were red from the rigor of labor. The thorn behind the gate ranch loomed large, a solid outline against the boundless plains. With his arms folded and a black cap over his eyes, Jack Thorn stood next to the post. "You lost?" he inquired. "No, sir," answered Clara. She spoke in a steady, low, and careful tone. "I'd heard that you needed assistance in the barn. I'm able to clean. I work hard." He examined her, thin, lonesome, and unthreatening. "Someone quiet is needed. No bullshit, barn only. I don't talk unless someone speaks to me." He nodded just once. "Barn's in the rear. The loft is where you sleep. Take care of yourself. Additionally, you stay away from the house. You get it?" "Indeed, sir." Without saying anything else, she turned and headed for the barn. Like fingers from the past, the wind pulled at her shawl. The days became hazy. Clara worked hard after sunset and before sunrise. She swept, shoveled, cleaned, and fed. She didn't talk to anyone until absolutely required. In her presence, the horses were more relaxed. Jack was the only one who observed her hands bleeding silently. He occasionally went by her, once in the blazing sun, while she was kneeling next to a through, her dresses back soaked with perspiration. "Here," he said, passing her a can of water and a rag. Startled, she looked up. "Thank you." He offered a quick. She nodded and turned to leave, but her gaze lingered, perplexed by the glimmer of tenderness behind his quiet. The former housemaid of the ranch, Mara, twisted her lip as she observed Clara. "She believes that being silent makes her holy," she whispered to the foreman, Harris. Harris laughed. "All she wants is to be near the boss or the kids." "Mark my words," Clara listened. She remained silent. Until her knees hurt, she simply kept cleaning the cubicle floor. When Jack stopped by the barn one evening, he heard a faint hum. He peered through the open door and saw Clara combing a mare, her voice a lullaby of pain rather than beauty. As she turned, he remarked, "It seems like horses like you." "Maybe they know I have nothing to take from them," she said. He moved more slowly as he left. Then the rumors began. When Harris knocked, Jack was seated at his desk. "Boss," he said, "folks are saying the widow's always hanging around the kid's stall, trying to cozy up too close." Jack's mouth tightened. He didn't respond right away. "Despite her silence, she is not necessarily clean." Jack sat motionless and gazed out the window after Harris departed. There was a reason the nursery stall was kept apart. That was a clear line he had drawn. Nevertheless, in the stillness of his thoughts, Jack saw once more the twins dozing in Clara's arms, the curve of her back in the hay, and her voice singing a tune that no one had taught her. Not out of rage, his hands tightened. In addition to not wanting to believe the rumors, he also didn't want to acknowledge how much she had already mellowed the quiet in his house. Thorn Ranch was silent late one night. In the main house's entryway, a lamp flickered, creating lengthy shadows on wooden floors. A familiar cry, harsh, high-pitched, and hurting, rang out from the nursery. Elsie was in tears. She was joined in a sorrowful chorus by EMTT shortly after. Their shouts echoed throughout the darkness, rising like sirens. Through the walls, down the corridor, and out to the barns. Jack Thorne, still wearing his boots, rubbed his eyes and rose up from the couch where he had fallen asleep. Already worn out after days of restless nights, he combed his hair. He opened the door of the nursery. The kids' little bodies were racking with tears, their faces flushed, and their fists clenched. Weeks prior, the nursemaid had departed. He had turned down a substitute. Their father was him. He had to bear the weight of it. However, they continued. He attempted to hold Elsie. She let out a louder scream. After setting her down, he picked up EMTT. The youngster writhed in his arms and arched his spine. Jack let out a defeated sigh. He buried his face in his hands as he sat next to the cot. Whispering to the darkness, he asked, "What do you want from me?" Clara lay awake from the loft of the barn. It wasn't the first time she heard the cries. She'd warned herself not to become involved. She had no place there. The conditions were explicit, but tonight there was something more profound in those cries. Pure air, sharper. She pulled her scarf tight, stood up, and walked out into the darkness. Holding EMTT again and repeating unmet promises, Jack wandered the house. The child's screams grew louder. Jack heard a stream coming from the hall and turned suddenly. Clara Ara stood barefoot, holding a small cup in her unsteady hands. "Gently. I can try," she murmured. Jack looked at her. "You're not allowed." Remotion that is both as general and detailed as possible, but done quickly rather than defiantly. "But I know what this kind of cry is." She walked, placing the cup on the table and entering the room slowly. "Just a little sugar and warm water, not excessively." He simply moved away without responding. Elsie was carefully raised by Clara, who rocked her with a rhythm derived from an innate feeling. She stroked the infant's lips with her finger after dipping it into the heated concoction. The toddler lapped heartily after pausing in surprise. Clara gave a gentle, melancholy grin. "Her hunger is for consolation, not milk." Jack remained silent as he watched. Clara hummed an old folk tune, broken in voice but steady in spirit, while EMTT's cries became softer. When Jack took a seat in the room's corner, she was unaware of it. Didn't realize his gaze was fixated on her rather than the twins. Her expression wasn't lovely. It was worn out, scarred by suffering. However, she had steady hands and an unwavering, grounded presence. The baby's respiration evened out as they fell silent. The space had a new, cozier feel. Clara eventually put, with her arms wrapped over the kids as though protecting them from the world's ghosts, her body rocked softly. She did not wipe away the tears that streamed down her face. Through them, she was singing. In Jack's chest, something pulled firmly. Clara swung around just enough to feel him there. When she spotted him, she froze. She muttered, "I'm sorry," and held the kids tighter. "I didn't intend to go too far." Once more they were in tears. "I wanted to avoid waking you up."
He didn't respond.
She hurriedly answered, "I'll go," attempting to get up. Her voice cracked. "I wanted no difficulty. I simply couldn't stand to hear them sobbing." Jack spoke in a calm but gruff manner as he moved slowly forward. "You're not in trouble." Unsure, she gazed at him. She remarked, "I thought maybe you'd fire me. Why would I do that?" Her mouth quivered. "Because I touched what wasn't mine." He gave the twins a look. In her sleep, Elsie let out a sigh while holding Clara Ara's dress in one hand. He said, "They don't seem to mind." Clara glanced up and then down at the kids. Not only were her eyes crimson from the crying, from memory, she mumbled that there was a baby. "He arrived too soon, my baby. He kicked me the day before. Then he vanished." Jack gasped. "I personally buried him," she added. A hollow voice. "Just me, a shovel, and a name I never got to pronounce aloud during a storm like this one." He looked down. "I'm at my limit," Clara remarked. "My body wasn't built for it," the doctor said. That day, something inside of me broke. As the storm spoke through the wood, the barn creaked around them. I make an effort to ignore the pain. I can most days. Once more, she glanced down at the kids. "However, when I hear them weep, I feel as though I can hear him, lonely and in need of someone. I can't leave." Jack placed the lantern next to him and took a seat on a nearby box. Soft gold was painted on his face by the light. He observed her, not with sympathy, but with acknowledgement. He said, "My wife died giving birth to them, following a protracted period of silence. I didn't know what to do with the grief, so I built walls and called it strength." Clara gave a slow nod. "Then we're both haunted." "Perhaps," he whispered. "Or perhaps we're simply sick of being alone." She remained silent. He turned his attention back to her, not to her tattered hands or faded shawl, but to the way she clutched the kids as if they were the only source of warmth she still had. "They sleep better with you," he freely acknowledged. Clara let out a barely perceptible breath. "I'm not sure why. I simply hold them." He got up. "I don't need another employee," he said. "However, perhaps we both require something more." She knitted her brow. "What do you say?" Jack glanced back at her after glancing at the twins. "Don't leave after the storm passes, I'm saying." She allowed herself to grin for the first time. Real but not bold or broad. It had been months since the main house's kitchen was warm. Since the burial, Jack Thorne had ceased to sit at his own table, and the hearth had become cold. However, he set the fire that evening and prepared food in an ungainly, clumsy, but deliberate manner. Unsure of what to do with her hands, Clara sat silently on the edge of a wooden chair. "You didn't have to go through all this," she replied. Jack put down a saucepan of stew and shrugged. "I figured it was time someone did." With the fire crackling softly next to them, they ate largely in silence. Clara's shoulders began to loosen up. After pouring coffee into 2 mugs and placing them on the table between them, Jack took a seat. "Ruth was the name of my wife," he finally stated. "She was strong, loud, braver than me, I think." With her hands around the mug, Clara listened. "She passed away bleeding the night they were born. Not a doctor in time. I buried her beneath the yoke on the hill. I buried mine by myself." Clara murmured softly, "Too." No one to offer prayers, no name inscribed. Rain was falling. Jack looked away as he nodded. "It's a boy," the midwife informed me. "He never shed a tear." For a little period they both sat still, perhaps terrified that the delicate item may be broken by their breath alone. Clara muttered, "I've been empty since, as if everything had stopped when he did." "So did I," said Jack. She gave him a look. "You really looked?" Additionally, he didn't appear to be a rancher who had been beaten down by losing for the first time. He appeared to be a man who had lost the ability to be held. Something unsaid filled the void between them. Lone. Not love, not yet. But the match had been struck. Shadows shifted under the eaves outside. Harris replied in a low voice. She spends too much time with those kids. That's history, not simply goodwill. She once had a child. Perhaps those twins belong to her, Mara continued, crossing her arms. Perhaps she returned to take him after giving him up. According to Harris, it ain't right. People are talking. Rumor had grown from murmurs to full-fledged rumors by daybreak. Before she heard it, Clara sensed it. How her passing caused hands to stop functioning. How the eyes stayed too long. Jack was standing on the front porch with his arms folded as she carried water to the house, but she still went about her chores. He said, "I heard it." She lowered her gaze. "It makes no difference. Let them express themselves. I care about it." That afternoon, Jack rang the iron bell, which was formally reserved for important events or crises. Wary, the staff gathered by the barn. Jack was in front of them, his gaze fierce and his hands solid. He claimed that there was a lot of talk about Clara, the kids, and things that shouldn't be spoken by people who don't have the authority to do so. Mara moved uneasily. Harris turned his head away. Jack spoke louder. "Those twins were not born to her. Ruth and I did. However, it was she who managed to put them to sleep when I was unable to. When the storms came, it was her who protected them from the cold. When the storms came, it was her who protected them from the cold. They are still alive and well because of her." He took a step forward, "And anyone who doubts her position here doubts mine. If you pursue her once more, you will have to answer to me. Quiet, then." With her back straight and her eyes focused, Clara moved up beside him. She didn't say anything, but she didn't shrink for the first time. In the face of criticism, she remained steadfast, and Jack remained by her side. The main house's windows shook with the thunderous boom of thunder. Through the trees, the wind howled like wolves, ripping branches from trunks and hurling them against sheds and fences. The rain came down in torrential, horizontal sheets. Storms had previously occurred at Thorn Ranch, but not to this extent. With his mouth gritted, Jack paced the front room. Debris flew across the yard, as a portion of the roof over the east barn had already pulled off. A chicken coop had fractured somewhere. He saw movement through the glass as the lightning flared once more. His heart ceased beating. Clara was racing barefoot and soaked over the muddy yard, holding Elsie's and EMTT's hands as she guided them to the supply shed at the rear of the property. Her shawl was whipped away by the wind, which soaked her from head to toe with each stride. A kid tripped. She swept him up without hesitation. Jack threw the door open. Rain hit him like a tidal wave. He called out into the storm, "Clarita!" but the wind cut him off. He was not heard by her, she continued. She pushed the shed door open, led the kids inside, and then slammed it behind them. Soaked to the bone, he stood motionless at the doorway, gazing across the turmoil. His breath froze in his throat as his fists clenched. Whispering, "She is the mother they needed," he said. "Not Clara, not Ruth, not even the nursemaid." Although it was shelter, the air within the shed was musty and moist. With her arms encircling both kids and squeezing their tiny bodies against hers, Clara hunched against the wall. They were crying and shivering. "It's okay," she whispered. "Mom is present." She didn't take back the words that spilt out before she could stop them. As the wind shook the walls, she softly rocked them while covering their heads with her arms. Even though her knees and back hurt from the chilly floor, she refused to let go. Not for anything. The ranch was hardly recognizable after the storm. In the muck, pieces of fencing were bent. On the distant hay barn, a tree had fallen. There was a collapsed horse stall. However, because those like Clara had refrained from running, there had been no fatalities or injuries. In the shed, Jack discovered her still snuggled with the twins, arms wrapped around them, eyes closed as they slept on her chest. Despite having her hair stuck to her cheeks and her garments drenched, she exuded a furious yet serene appearance. He lingered for a while in the doorway. After that, he entered. "Clara," she said, softly opening her eyes. Without moving, she muttered, "They're all right." He knelt next to her, "I know. You had the option to remain in the loft. You didn't need to put yourself in danger." "They just needed someone," she added. His voice broke. I did too. In order to re-establish himself in the weight, warmth, and constant presence of her, he reached out and lightly caressed her shoulder. When he said, "You're not staff anymore," his voice was low. "You are neither an employee nor an assistant," he met her gaze. "Your household." Clara's mouth parted just enough to let tears fall instead of words. Cradling all three of them, he drew her close to him. When the wind outside eventually died, he held the mother and the kids against his chest. The ranch hands got together the following day to evaluate the damage. They anticipated updates, orders, and possibly blame. Rather, they discovered Clara standing next to Jack Thorne outside the shed, his arm over her shoulders, the twins peering out from below her skirt. He didn't announce anything. He was not required to. For the first time, the people who had been whispering behind her back looked her in the eye with respect rather than mistrust after seeing the image, which said it all. When fresh thunder started to roll, the storm had just left the ground, in the shape of whispers this time. With her arms crossed and her eyes as keen as shards of glass, Mara stood at the general store. Strange, isn't it? She spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear her. She held onto the kids as if they were her own. Harris chewed a toothpick while leaning against the doorframe. It's not natural. A woman enters carrying only a bag. All of a sudden, she has two heirs, a ranch, and the boss's eye. Those twins were most likely given away by her years ago. She's back now to pick up. Do you genuinely believe they belong to her? Slowly, Mara nodded. And Jack, he's too lost in grief to see it. Just outside Thorne Ranch, a rudimentary sign had been painted and hammered into the ground by the end of the week. Encourage fraud with 2 underlines in red letters. Everyone saw it, even though nobody claimed to have made it. It was discovered by Clara initially. She remained there, staring at the broken wood, her breath trapped in her chest. This time, the sting behind her eyes caused the words to blur rather than the rain. She remained silent. After turning around, she resumed her task. However, the walls she had been rebuilding for weeks started to tremble inside. Jack used one hand to tear the sign off the ground. He clenched the saddle horn with the other hand until his knuckles were white. He rode directly into the town. A notice was posted on the saloon windows and the church doors that afternoon. Getting together, Town Hall, 5 Mall, Thorne will talk. By nightfall, almost all of the ranchers, merchants, and laborers had assembled beneath the town hall's rafters. Murmurs flitted about. With her back against the wall, Clara stood just inside the door. Her palm was wet with anxiety as she gripped a tiny whiteboard with one hand. Sitting calmly on an adjacent bench were the twins. Jack took the initiative. He started, "I hear some of you think I've been fooled. That I allowed a woman who doesn't belong in my house after being duped." He looked around the throng. Harris averted his eyes. Mara barely held hers. "Well," Jack went on, "you're correct in one regard. I opened my house to a woman." He turned and pointed to Clara. She had no land deeds with her. She made no requests for inheritance. Despite having little, she gave more than any of us. He hesitated. I saw her take care of my kids during difficult evenings. When I had nothing more to contribute, I watched her feed them. She made no attempt to become their mother. She turned into it. Then gently, by staying when she had every cause to go, rather than by blood. He took a step back. Clara took a hesitant step forward. She held up the whiteboard with the words, "I do not want land," scribbled in tiny, meticulous characters. "I desire them." I wasn't needed until they were. She brought the board down. There was silence for a long time. A widow who had buried 3 sons during the war, Mrs. Anders, an elderly woman at the rear, then cleared her throat. She claimed to have stayed through the storm. "That's more than most," others gave a nod. The room moved one by one. Mara took a step back towards the door. Harris eased out next to her, now quiet. They were not halted. In front of everyone else, Jack took Clara's hand. "She doesn't clean my house. She is my children's mother." The silence was louder than cheers, but the town did not cheer. Additionally, the night was quiet. Prior to the first cry, Clara was awakened in the loft by a constriction in her chest. There was a problem. The quiet cried out. The barn floor was cold underfoot as she hurried barefoot down the ladder. There was nothing in the cot where Elsie and EMTT normally rested after storms. She gasped. There was a crumpled blanket. The rear door was ajar a little. "No," she said in a whisper. "No, no," she cried as she ran with a racing heart towards the main house. At the door, Jack greeted her, eyes already alert, half-dressed. Words weren't necessary for her. "They're gone," she said with a start. "The children gone." A few seconds later, the alarm bell rung, resounding like a battle cry throughout the property. People poured out of their bunks. The sound of boots hitting wood. The lanterns flared. One yelled, "Tracks lead north. 2 pairs of footwear." Little footprints, too. New. Without hesitation, Jack and Claire mounted their horses. Clara's fingers were shaking, but stable enough as she held a lantern. Jack took the initiative after holstering his gun. The trail was not big enough for horses, so they galloped hard into the forest. Branches were whipped by the wind. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness. There were deep shadows between the trunks as Clara's flame faltered. She listened to every sound in the brush and every leaf crack. Then to the right, a faint wail. As she veered off, she yanked her horse. Jack did not question it. They came to an ancient hunting shed that was leaning crookedly next to the rocks in a clearing. Clara was the first to jump down. The twins were inside, huddled in the corner, gagged, scared, and covered in tears. Mara was standing close by, a knife in one hand and a lantern in the other. A figure with a rifle and a scarred jaw stood next to her. He yelled, "Stay back!" as Jack came in behind Clara, growling. "You've gone mad," Jack said. "It isn't insane," Mara spat. "It's fairness. You were duped by her. Everything that should have been mine was given to her by you, that spot in your heart, that land, and those kids." "They're not yours," Clara stated in a stern yet hushed voice. Mara yelled, "She doesn't deserve it." The town now calls her Mommy after she appears out of nowhere. She is nothing. The firearm was raised by the man. Jack took a steady, cautious step forward with his revolver drawn. He responded icily, "I only need one good shot." The man's hand twitched as he paused. Then he let the pistol fall. He murmured that he wasn't paid enough for this and ran into the woods. Clara moved more quickly than Mara, deflecting the sword with a broken plank as Mara came for her.